Like the video. Thumb up the video.
The Duke of Aseer. Brother Aseer.
Peace. What's
Peace.
up, everybody?
What's going on, brother?
I am Aseer, the Duke of Teirs. This is my queen, Selena. We're here in the House of Consciousness with Brother Sarnetta. Just giving love and peace to all of the ancestors, to all of the brothers and sisters who have had to die for lack of knowledge, for all of those sisters that died for what they knew. We here to make it real and to bring forth and channel the energy of the brother Hannibal Barker. So with no further ado, we should just basically get into it. I don't know if there's something you want to ask first, brother, or you just want me to get in.
Nah, you can get ahead, man. I opened it up. It's your floor now.
Okay. So
the people want to hear you, brother. That's what they want to hear, man.
Okay. So I'm gonna give them something to hear, man. Well, when we talk about, I didn't get this hole in my page. When we talk about global history, right? Or we talk about history in general, what we're talking about is an actual energy field that exists throughout time. Time, as we know, is not only a system for categorizing your day, it is also a vehicle in which we as people systematically have always used to jump into one time frame into the other. So specifically today we're talking about Hannibal Barker and what he meant to us and how we can use him as a blueprint for Moorish global conquest. Again, when I say Moorish, I'm using it as a term to mean and identify original people who cannot be qualified by any one thing. So when I say original people, I'm talking about the original man, the original woman, the original child. Everybody that comes after that are variations or byproducts of what it is we put down. So when we talk about Hannibal, you know, there's been a lot of things spoken about him. There's been a lot of things said. There's been a lot of things put out there that really had nothing to do with who the man was. One of the ways the European tried to do that was he created a serial killer named Hannibal Lecter. And what Hannibal Lecter was, he was basically a red herring to use the energy of who Hannibal Barker was and the strength and wisdom and moral science that Hannibal Barker was dealing with, but they put it in the form of a killer. You know what I'm saying? When you use the name Hannibal, right? First of all, let's get into that. Han or Han or Hani means black. You know what I'm saying? That's just what it means. It doesn't have any like crazy, like esoteric, deeper meaning other than that. So when you get Hani, like when you say like in ancient China, there was a group of people called the Han dynasty that came out of the Shang or the Xiang. The Han means black. Hani, like in Hanuman or Hanuman, represents the monkey king or the monkey god in the Vedic type of cosmology. Ball is something that represents round, or something that can be representative of, let's say, the circle of life or the earth, or something that can be held, thrown, caught. You know what I'm saying? So Hannibal, as a individual, like I said, represents a lot to us as a people that we don't necessarily get credit for or give him credit to. So again, this is not necessarily purposeful, but this is how the European, I don't want to use European because black people, the it likes to use situations in which he can create a false perception of who you are and who your ancestors are in order for him to siphon the energy from it for himself. Case in point, like I said, Hannibal Lecter, man. He when you look at those movies and you see how he gets down, you will see that he's actually a civilized person. And you will see that he is actually the type of person that is all about manners and etiquette. and he only eats people or ate people that were disrespectful. You know what I mean? So how does that relate to the great Hannibal Barca? Well, it relates to him in a lot of different fashions, because again, if there was no Hannibal Barca, there would be no Hannibal Lecter. So the guy Thomas Harris, when he wrote these books, you know what I'm saying, for him to write and use the moniker of a great king as that, meaning that he is trying to take the energy of what Hannibal Barca, who Hannibal Barca is, as a Moor, as a Phoenician and all of that, to give credence and power to his character. Case in point, there was also Hannibal from the A-Team. Everybody remember him, right? Mm-hmm. You had Hannibal, and you had B.A. Baracus, and you had everybody else. But Hannibal was the leader of the team, right? But instead of Mr. T being Hannibal, we had to make George Papard, the Caucasian man, Hannibal, who was the leader, who was figuring out how they could get into certain hostile places throughout the world as a mercenary team and do their thing.
Why do they do that? I want you to tell the children out there, why do they have to, why is it important for them to portray Hannibal as the Caucasian, the European, the it?
Because anytime you have a situation, right, in which somebody was not there, right, when it becomes profitable for the people that were there to be witnesses to the event, they never want to act like they left out. So what they got to do is they got to put themselves in the mythic history in order for them to be perceived as being able to be there. Because if it was found out that they were not there, or that Caucasian people as we understand them today did not exist in the way that they like to depict themselves being present at the time, that means that they can't tell you about your history no more. Mm-hmm. Because they were not there to witness it or be involved in it in any way. And remember, it has to constantly create a reference point based on time for him to exist within. Because if he does not put himself in the spheric reality of the time frame in which you derive from, that means that then he is on the outside of time or outside of creation, and that means that he does not exist.
Okay, when we talk about Hannibal today, they still to this very day study his methods of war.
Yeah, in war college.
And how so?
In war college, in Army War College, in places like West Point, in places like Fort Dix, in places like Fort Detrick, in places like Camp David, all of these places. Camp Pendleton, right? All of these places, man. Anywhere you see the army at, they are dealing with Hannibal. They are following his war ethic. They are following his. They even talk about him in metallurgy class. Metallurgy is the science of military science of creating and using armored form of warfare in their campaigns. So the first person to really go in hard on a campaign based on war was Hannibal Barca. But before we get into all of that, we should give a little brief history as to create a reference point as to where he was at the time. Excuse me. First, Hannibal.
Yeah, let's go into the history.
When we go back into the history of it, okay? We're going way before the time of what they call the Punic Wars, when he first came on the world scene, the world stage. We can go into, let's say, the Peloponnesian Wars, right, of the ancient Aegean Sea. In history, if you want to get a movie on it, you could watch Troy with Brad Pitt. It really wasn't that good, but, you know, they playing your story. So long as you look at the movie and you vision everybody in the movie as black people, dark-skinned black people and light-skinned black people, you'd be straight. During that time, there was a guy named Agamemnon. This is around the time of what they call the Peloponnesian Wars. And Agamemnon was there, and what he wanted to do is he was basically the Nimrod of ancient Greece. He was trying to unite everybody up under one banner in which the Grecian states would be recognized kind of the way the United States is recognized now. But when I say Greek, I'm not talking about Caucasian people or white people or people that live in Greece today per se. I'm talking about lighter skinned to brown, medium toned black people that were living in the Aegean at the time. Agamemnon, who was the leader of all of the teams at the time, was a black man. He had a son named Perseus. You know what I mean? And when you get into the story of Perseus, another version of him was Pericles. When you get into the version, read books by called the Odyssey of Homer, and you talk about or the Iliad, and you read books about him, you can get into who Agamemnon really was. But he was a black man, just like most of the Greeks and the Phoenicians and these people at the time. They started warring, like I said, because they all wanted to be unified under one thing, and they all didn't want to do that. Some of them wanted to rock their own nationalistic ideology.
Now, when you say they started warring, who are you talking about?
I'm talking about the Peloponnesian Greeks, Spartans, people from Troy, Macedonian, all of the people today that classical European or Western ideology reveres as the Greeks, the forerunners of Western democracy, right, or Western philosophy. These people were from the West, but they was trained in the East, because Socrates and all of them was black. Okay. Now, it got to the point where when Agamemnon wanted to unite all of these people, some of them rebelled, and then it brought about what they call the Peloponnesian Wars, and places like Pompeii and Greece and Lydia and Minoa and all of these ancient places existed. These people were fighting amongst themselves. These are, again, black people that were going at each other because they were trying to figure out how they were going to create a society kind of in the West, and what they now call Asian minded, that would be synonymous to the empires that was already existing in ancient Samaria, ancient Kemet, ancient America, ancient South Africa, and so forth and so on. So this was basically established, and eventually Agamemnon won, and Troy, he won during the Battle of Troy, and basically set himself up as the king. But during the battle, he was killed by one of his greatest warriors named Achilles, and Achilles wound up dying too. So once the peace was kind of structured and all of the Grecian states were kind of solidified, all of the Grecian states eventually had their beginnings before the Peloponnesian Wars. Let's say 150 to 350 years before that, you had a group of people called the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians had their things set up in such a way where they were the international traders, where they used the oceans as rivers. The way you would use a river or a steamboat going up the Mississippi, they would use oceans in the same way by manifesting the currents and being able to take different knowledge different places.
All right, before we go on, right, some people say, well, what does this have to do? Why is this so important? Why is history so important? How could this pay my rent? I want you to explain, my brother, why is this important to us as a darker hue people? Why is knowing this important to us? Could it pay my bills? Could it pay my rent? Yeah. What could this do for me to better me?
There's over 185 books written about Hannibal Barca alone, most of which is written by Caucasian males who are taking your ancestor, the person who fought for you, and taking his legacy and putting their face on him, and they are waging wars in his name by following his tactics and his strategy, and are making money off it every day. You don't think you make money off it? Look at Blackwater in Iraq right now. They are following Hannibalian tactics. Look at the Marines in the army during Vietnam and what they call a Tet Offensive. That was a Hannibalian tactic. You know what I'm saying? When you look at how the COINTELPRO flipped everything that they was doing against the Panthers and so forth and so on, the Nation of Islam and these people, that was a Hannibalian tactic. That's how he got into Sardinia. But if you don't know how that relates to you, and again the Caucasian hopes that you don't, you know what I'm saying, then what happens is you're a fool. And anybody that doesn't want to learn about themselves is a fool. I don't give a damn how many schools you done went to, how many things you don't think you need to know. If you don't find out all the aspects of yourself as an immortal being, as well as a black man, as well as a child of God, then you're a fool. It don't matter. I don't give a damn what it is you think is going on. If you don't think that it's relevant to you, then you're a fool. You know what I'm saying? And it's not.
Okay, now I want you to take us up to the part where Hannibal decided that he had to go to war against these people, against the And how? And I'm gonna ask you all these questions. How was he able to get the elephants up into Europe, into Spain? That's where they went at, right? Up into Spain,
through the Alps.
Yes. How was he able to do all that? Let's take it from the beginning, brother.
Okay. Like I said, melanin is such a superconductor that we can go all over the place and still get the basic premise of what we're talking about.
That's right.
So, anybody with that should do the knowledge to that. The Phoenicians, right? It doesn't start with them, but it has a lot to do with them, because the Phoenicians occupied a place today that we call Morocco. In the 1400s, we called it the Maghreb, and then before that, it was a part or an annexed part of an empire that existed called Songhay. So during the time of the Grecian states, when they began to fall, right? They began to fall based on the fact that they were dealing inappropriately with each other. You had certain states that were known for certain things, like the Spartans were known for straight up war, you know what I mean? Whereas the Athenians were known for war, but they were more strategy orientated. The Spartans was just all about, they were like the foot soldiers, the grunts in it, the infantrymen. Whereas you had people, other Greek states that were all doing their own different thing. So eventually there was a new empire starting to bring up about itself and come into the world stage that eventually became known as Rome. That was allegedly started by a guy named Remus and his brother Romulus, who the legend was that their mother and their father were killed, and they had to both suckle from a she-wolf, right? And there are images to this day in Rome of a wolf with two human babies under it sucking from the udders of the wolf. Now, does that mean that these people actually did that? Could be, you know what I mean? And that's how they came about. Maybe they were, the Greeks, some of the Greek states practiced infanticide, in which they would ritually sacrifice their children and leave them in the woods and stuff to certain deities. One of the deities that they worshipped was the wolf goddess Lobos, and Lobos was seen as the she-wolf, and she was representative of what Rome ultimately was going to be. So as much as Rome is symbolized by the eagle, it's also symbolized by the wolf, because the she-wolf was the one that gave suckle to Romulus and Remus, who were the twins, who eventually went into the Grecian states and coalesced them all into a Roman ideology. So these Romans, as they came to be called that, were called that because they roamed from one state to another and absorbed it through a means of hostile takeover. How did they do this? They did this by sending letters. The same way Moors, when they deal with correspondences with the government, where they take out what they call administrative international remedies. That basically means that if I want your property, I send you a letter saying that you got to give it up. If you don't respond to that letter, whether you know me or not, I then can use the fact that you didn't respond to me as a dishonorment and then take that to the court of the day. If the court of the day agrees with me, then now I have the means or the right to now go into your kingdom and take what I want from you. This is how the United States was able to get into Iraq eventually, despite what the UN and everybody being around, because the United States practiced an international administrative remedy to do so. They found that, or they inherited that from the Romans and everybody else that existed at the time. So the Romans that we're talking about today, though, we're not talking about, again, Caucasian people. We're talking about a lighter skinned type of black man and woman that existed at that time, that grew out of a people, an ancient people called the Etruscans, who eventually became known as Minoans, who eventually became known as Lydians, who eventually became known as Grecians, and eventually became known as Romans. So by the time...
Excuse me for a minute. Now that's a beautiful lesson what you just said, brother, because a lot of our people don't know that we was actually all over the world before it came into existence.
Before he even existed.
We navigated all over.
All of it.
Is it good to say navigated?
Yeah.
All right. Yes. Well, we navigated all over the world before the Europeans got there.
Yeah.
Continue on what you were saying, brother. I'm sorry to cut you off. I just had to throw that in there right quick.
No, thank you. I appreciate that because we don't take responsibility. That's another reason why we ain't where we at, because we don't take responsibility for what we did in history because we don't know our history. Mm-hmm. We take for granted that these people in Rome was white, but But how is that? How is it you could go to Rome and see the Acropolis, or Greece and see the Acropolis breaking down as time does to structures, but then you go to the other side of the street and then you see pictures or statues of Caucasian people that look like new because they was put there in 1945, between 1945 and 1960 for people to create the ideology that Caucasian people existed at the same time. But if you carbon date the statue, you will see when it was done. But that's another story. But getting back to the brother in Rome. So Rome, which was an empire established through hostile takeover, basically established itself to do exactly that. So because it had a good infantry, it was able to then go into certain countries or whatever, and then basically absorb the people and the empire into the Roman ideology way of life. So if the people was worshiping let's say they were worshiping Anubis, right, which is Anpu, they wouldn't necessarily, the Romans would come and allow them to do that, but instead of calling them Anubis now, you got to call them Hades. You see what I'm saying? Because that's what we're calling them. So it went from being, you know, our ideology. So Ethos was the original name of the king of the gods in the Grecian cosmogony, right? But then when Rome came through, they switched his name from Ethos to Zeus, because Ethos mean black. You know what I'm saying? So they telling you that they was used to worship you because they weren't worshiping anything on the outside of themselves. We as original people create images of ourselves to venerate ourselves in order to give that energy, that historical time energy, back to the ancestors. So it wasn't about us worshiping idols. It was about us creating images and to venerate our greatness as people. Mm-hmm. So it got to the point where Rome now is on the world stage and they're creating themselves to look as if they are going to be just as big as Samaria or Kemet or whatever. But they had a problem. They didn't really have no navy like that. You understand? And in any empire that is going to rule something, you need a navy. Because if you don't have no navy, then that means that anybody can come up in your waters and make it happen. Now, we as original people have been going in and up into Europe for as long as before there was a Europe. Before we called it that, we was there. We had kingdoms from what they call the pre-Neolithic period. We're talking over 45,000 BC. You know what I'm saying? We had always established footholds in that because there was never any place that we couldn't go and not see an aspect of ourselves or an empire that we didn't help found. So the biggest empire that kind of evolved based on trade and money and power and prestige at the time was Carthage. Okay, Carthage came out of Phoenicia, right? And Phoenicia again was the Phoenicians, where you get the term Phoenix from. You get the term we get the term phonics from. We get the term pho, P-H-O, which is another way of saying light, or pH, which is the balance that you have to have within your body to maintain your equilibrium, your pH balance. You know what I'm saying? These are all of the sciences and the things that were developed by these intrinsically brilliant people that established a language based on having to go into other people and not speak their language, but then still have to create commerce. So all of the science of commerce and money and prestige or material gain was created by these people that also created a certain dye called Morex, okay, that was used to stain the beautiful royal blue and purple robes that kings and queens to this day still wear. So again, your history being brought back to you. So the Phoenician people eventually became known as the Carthaginians, or Carthage, right? Carthage was so paid at one time, and this is today. Carthage would be seen as, let's say, North Africa, all the way over to Tunis, right? North Africa, or Carthage, was so powerful at the time that kings would send tributes through caravan and trade routes every day of the year. Because sometimes you would be so far away, like if you was from Hexion, which is now China, it would take you years for the king to get his tribute to Carthage, in order that mighty Carthage would then take a trade route and go to China and drop them off some goods. You know what I'm saying? So around the time that Rome began to see this, it realized that it could not fully expand into Asia Minor in these places with Carthage still being there. So what they had to do, the Romans had to do, is they had to start creating almost a trade embargo with Carthage. Because what Carthage was doing was that it was not only buying and bringing goods and services to people, it was then trading goods and services for land in Roman territory. You know what I'm saying? Which is what you're supposed to do. Whenever a country goes into war, the country that it's warring against is never the country that it initially wants to war against. Whenever a country goes to war with another country, the country usually that they're fighting is never the one that they want to fight. That's the one that they need to fight to establish what's called a beachhead, another term coined by Hannibal, in order for them to get further into the main country. Case in point, it was never about Iraq, it was always about Iran. You know what I mean? So now, in order for them to destabilize, because remember, we're jumping in history now, in the 80s, 1980s, United States was funneling money to Iraq in order to destabilize the Iranian Shah, right? When that happened, when they realized they couldn't do it, they realized now they had to go back, and they were getting what the CIA refers to as blowback. Blowback is when you get residual effect, negative effect from the black op, or the operation that you're trying to initiate. They got that from Hannibal Barca. You know what I'm saying? I'll show and prove why. The Punic Wars is what started the whole thing between Rome and Carthage. Okay? Now, for clarity and image wise and mind purposes, in order for any original people watching this, imagine Rome as a whole nation of Roman people as you depict them and have been trained to see them, but instead of seeing them as Caucasian people, see them as they really were, as lighter skinned or brown skinned black people. Now when you think of the Carthaginian or the Phoenician people, think about darker skinned black people, okay, that don't necessarily have as straight hair as, let's say, the Roman people may have. So these are two black people basically going at each other, based on not on them hating each other for being black or light skinned, but not agreeing with each other based on the nation state that they're coming out of, or the empire that they represent. If you was in Rome at the time, you would be representing, you'd be throwing up the R because you going in for Rome. But if you was from Carthage, you'd be throwing up the C because you going out for Carthage. This don't mean that you hate this person because he's lighter skinned than you. That may be that may be something that eventually evolved based on you having to find a way to hype yourself up against your brother or your sister.
So why did Hannibal decide that he had to go up into Spain? And how was he able to bring them animals?
Okay. And
how effective? Because I want this to be for the youth too.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't want you to get too heavy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want you to try to bring it down a little for the babies to get this information. Because when I'm out there, sisters be like, "Yo, do you have anything with my child, for my baby girl?" Not baby, but like say for more like 12 years old, 13. Bring it up in there, like where they can use this for their project.
Okay. There's a lot of great books, first of all, on Hannibal that are not necessarily all written by Caucasian people. There's been over 185 books written about him You know what I'm saying? And I would say, let's say 98% of them is written by Caucasian people. But there's a book called Blacks Before America. I forget the author's name right now. But he talks about him and extensively. Not only him, but his contemporaries at the time. Because, again, we sometimes will focus on a person in history, but we won't realize or won't focus on the things that made this person great within that time. And it's usually the people that he had to be for or against. So
Kessler, Kobstler.
No, it was another dude. No, it was another dude. But the title's Blacks Before America. You could check it out. But when Hannibal was a boy, his father. First of all, it was three of them. It was Hannibal, Hasdrubal, and Mago. Hannibal was the middle kid. Hasdrubal was the oldest. Mago was the youngest. Their father's name was Hamilcar Barca. Right?
Alright, so now you're getting into
Hamilcar.
That's beautiful.
Hamilcar was a great general. He was so great, in fact, that he wouldn't even, that if a person was to say something about him in a negative fashion, okay, and it got back to one of his soldiers, there was a law in Carthage law that you couldn't speak out against this man because he was so revered by the people. Also, Carthage as an empire was not like Rome in a traditional sense that they had a triumvirate where they had like a group of senators and then a Caesar. No, this was a trade empire and everybody was equal. So in essence, you had princes, nobles, dukes, queens, all of that, right? But when it came time for the war, they just kept a mercenary army always on tap, because they had so much money that people, when they would come to certain things and pay money and sell their goods, they would have groups and throngs of people from whatever nation they was at that was clamoring to have Carthaginian citizenship and to come back and fight for Carthage because Carthage was so dope.
What time period are we talking about?
We're talking about between 138 BC and 247 BC. So at this time in Kemet, we're in about we're in the first, let's say, pre-dynastic. We're like coming right out of the pre-dynastic period into, let's say, the first 2 or 3 dynasties in Kemet at the same time, analogous to this. So Hannibal, as or I should say his father Hamilcar, was seen as the grand general for the whole mercenary army. And what he would do is he would report to the council that was representative of all of the mercantile interests of the nation. So it would be like today if you was to go to a meeting for all of the people in the fashion industry, or all the people in the recording industry, all of those people that represent all of those different labels. Let's look at those labels as if they were nations. And then all of the people around them and then all the people up under them have to do what they say. But when they all got together, the president of Rockefeller, the president of Bad Boy, the president is the president of that, those are all of the people that make the decisions for the nation. So whenever things would go down for the nation, or if the nation was going to expand or the empire was going to expand, they would call Hamilcar in and ask him his opinion on how they need to facilitate that. So they knew that Rome had swallowed up the Grecian states. And based on the trade relationships that they had with the Grecian states, that eventually Rome would try to impart and try to come in and take them over. So what they did was they took the offensive based on what Hamilcar suggested. He suggested that we set up colonies in and around Spain, was now Spain, and Europe, so far going all the way up to, let's say, France, where we were going to set the whole thing up, or even into Switzerland, going even farther back. So they allowed him to do that. So what Hamilcar did was he got his shorties, his sons together, and his sons, Hasdrubal was the oldest, so he would go out with him with the campaigns. But then something happened eventually, and Hasdrubal had to go somewhere else, and so Hannibal started rolling with his pops. Mago would stay at home and maintain the basic, the structure of the home and everything to protect, the estate. So when it was decreed that there was actually going to be a war with Rome, Hamilcar would then do guerrilla things. He would go up into Rome with Hannibal, and then they would play catch and mouse. They would play cat and mouse with the Roman army. They would try to see how far they could get, how close they could get to the army without the army seeing them. And then once the army saw them, they would say, oh, well, we was just up here practicing. You know what I mean? They would do psychological warfare on these people, because that's where the first war starts. It starts in the ethereal realms first, in the subconscious, superconscious first, and then you materialize what you want to do through the actual act of the warfare. So Hamilcar would do things like that. He would set up slaves. He would buy slaves from Rome that were begrudged to Rome, and then train them as spies, and then sell them back to Rome. And then those slaves would then get bought by Roman noblemen and noblewomen, and then he would find out everything through them. You know what I'm saying? Then you use that intelligence to come back, and then use that as a means to gather a further army and put further disrest in Rome before any war was even fought. Before they even fighting. This in modern times is called foreign diplomacy. This is how you basically set up the war and what you want from a nation or a nation state. All of these programs and tactics come from the time of what they call the Punic Wars, in which, again, Hamilcar Barca, the great general, was basically creating unrest within Rome itself, not by actual physical violence, but through what today we would call intelligence. So it got to the point where Rome started really sweating, and the senators and this is all the time now too. Rome is a republic. It's not run by a Caesar yet. So they're still trying to figure out how they're going to deal with this war thing. So what they began to do is they start dealing with enemies of Carthage, which were a group of Moors, or another group of people called the Gadamantes, who by the time the Punic Wars actually started started to become known as Numidians. This is where you get the term Numidian or Midian or Mediterranean. It all comes from the term that. But whenever you put "new" in front of it, you're dealing with black people. So again, it's showing you where your people is at. But they would occupy the space in what now today we will call West Africa, going down into places like Mali and the Dogon River and stuff. So ultimately, it got to a point where Hamilcar an attempt was made on Hamilcar's life. So he knew that it was really on and that war was going to be inevitable. So he got his son Hannibal with him, and this is a famous legend about how Hannibal, what drove Hannibal to do the things he did. He basically sat his son down in front of an image of Fortuna, which is the goddess, which is also another image of the goddess of luck. So she's also symbolic to Lakshmi, also symbolic to Isis, you know. And he sat his son down and made his son swear before the image of the goddess that he would never lay down with Rome, that he would never make deals with Rome, that he would do everything in his power for as long as he lived and his descendants lived to bring Rome down. So Hannibal made this oath at 12. And now you know that the Phoenicians, again, they are descendants of the Carthaginians are descended from the Phoenicians, and Phoenicians also brought about phonics and writing, and they're also the ones that dealt heavily with the Hebrew people. So you know that there's a lot of connection between the people we call the Phoenicians and the people we call the Hebrews, or the Canaanites. It's basically the same people. So you know in that cosmogony that you become a man at 12 or 13. So when he made this oath, he was then now ready to start leading a regiment in the cavalry. And that's what he did. So at 13, Hannibal is now leading campaigns into Rome, setting up colonies in a place they now to this day call Sardinia, which is one of the biggest colonies that Carthage had at the time. So what Hannibal started doing was he started going at it with Rome, not only by sea but by land. So it got to the point where as the Punic Wars was going back and forth, Carthage won the first the first one. The second war ended kind of in a stalemate. Each war lasted for about maybe 20 years. So by about the time of towards the end of the Second Punic War, Hannibal had assessed enough information about Rome that he was seen as what they call a barbarian. So what the Roman people started doing was they started propagating the image that Hannibal, was basically the devil incarnate. That he was just the most despicable barbarian that you would ever see. They made such depictions of him in their literature about the things that he was doing. The same way the United States government is doing the same thing that they're doing with, Iran and all of these other places. They're trying to make us believe that these people are the worst people in the world and that they want to destroy everything about us. Now, that's not true. You know what I'm saying? Just as it was not true then. Yet, Rome is a xenophobic society. And those brothers and sisters that first set up ancient Rome were very xenophobic for whatever reason. It may have been the climate, it may have been the resources, it may have been them suckling from a she-wolf. We'll never really know. But what we do know is that they are a society based on, obsessed with the idea that somebody wants to steal their way of life. At the same time, want to act as if their way of life is the greatest in the world, and they want to force people to comply to that. The same thing that Rome did during the Punic Wars is the same thing that Rome is doing now.
Exactly.
So again, Hannibal Barca, bless the dead, he basically devised a surefire way to use what they have promoted against him to his advantage. So he said, okay, these people want to see me as the ultimate monster, so I'm going to create the ultimate monster for them. The people in Rome have never seen elephants. They've never seen zebras and lions and stuff like that. They've never seen it like that because these animals, lions and elephants, are not indigenous to Europe. So that means they didn't even see peacocks and stuff like that. That stuff was not in Europe at the time. So any exotic animal that they seen like that, to these Romans that are under the mental occupation of the people that are trying to make them think they're the best people in the world, they're looking at that as coming from another planet, from hell, or from whatever else they want to conjure up in their mind. So what Hannibal say is, great, what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to get these elephants and I'm going to bring them on a boat. But instead of bringing them to the coast of Sardinia, in which how we always do, I'm going to go around. I'm going to sail around Italy and go all the way up to the Netherlands. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to go up to the Swiss Alps and I'm going to bring the elephants from, instead of going from the bottom up, I'm going to come from the top down. And what he did was he went and got the elephants now. Now an African elephant, okay, are bigger than, at the time that we're talking about, these African elephants was damn near the size of dinosaurs, man. You know, you look at 300, the movie 300, you'll see them bringing the elephants in. That was a contingent of Hannibal's military. Whenever you see elephants in the military being used, that's evidence of Hannibal's greatness in the army and them following his tactics to win a war. So whether it was from Alexander the Great, whether it was from the Persians and the Spartans, it's the same premise. So an African elephant at the time that we're talking about is damn near the size of a woolly mammoth with the tusks. Okay? So he would bring these animals in, and he already had the intelligence through the scouts and the people that he had already sent as spies maybe 2 to 10 years before he was even going to bring them in. So he had already had the layout of what Rome was, what doors he could go into, what passes he need to take, and all of that. So he was already set. So he was not going to invade though, because there was a part of him that realized that it would be better to work a diplomatic relationship out with Rome first, and then gradually absorb them. But they killed his brother in an assassination attempt that may or may not have been set up by Scipio Africanus. We'll never really know, because again, most of this history is coming through the same people that's lying now. So
you said Africanus.
Scipio Africanus.
That's who they say they named Africa after?
Yeah.
Was he an African or white man?
He was a light-skinned black man.
Okay.
But then there was another guy named Leo Africanus that came maybe around the 1400s AD, way after, who was a Moor that they used to go into Africa and then map it out, and then they say they gave that name too. Either way, it's still from a black man.
Right.
So one of the things that there's a book called The Road to Rome, written by this Moor in 1927 named Victor Mature. And in that, when you read that book, he basically builds on the fact that not only did they try to assassinate Hannibal, but they tried to they missed and wound up killing his brother. And then when that happened, it just resolved it even more. So it got to the point where his soldiers couldn't even say, he was so on it that you couldn't even use the term Rome without spitting on the ground. Like Carthage was about it. So it got to the point, again, where when Hannibal was about to make the excursion into the Alps by using the elephants, again, this is all psychological warfare. Because most of the wars that Rome fought with Carthage was fought in the sea. And we was always kicking their butts with that. Because remember, Rome didn't really have a navy like that. They absorbed the Grecian navy, but all the Grecian navy soldiers, navigators, had to go to Carthage to learn how to sail and build boats. So again, Carthage is always on top. We always doing our thing. The word car to this day come from Carthage because the word car means to move. You know what I mean? It also means black, but all of these are just points to add on to the cipher. So it got to the level of severity where when we was heard that Hannibal was coming through the Alps. See, initially they were looking for him coming from the coast. Because that's how most of the wars have been fought to that time. We would dock on the coast and then move in and then start making things happen. No, he went the opposite way. He sent a dummy army contingent, let's say a battalion, which is no more than, let's say, about 500 to 650 men. You know what I mean? As a battalion, let's say. He brings the battalion up, and the Roman army thinks that that is who they're fighting. But what he is doing, he is outflanking them by coming down through the top. So while they're dealing with these people at the bottom, they done left all of Rome wide open. And now he's coming from behind them in a flanking maneuver to come back in through the top and basically go into the center of the heart of Rome. This is when the term Hannibal is at the gates, or the barbarians is at the gates. There was a book about hostile takeover and a movie written about it back in the 80s. Called Barbarians at the Gates, and it was basically an allegory of hostile takeover, Hannibal coming in to just wreak havoc on European society. So right when he got to the point that he was going to invade them, for some reason he stopped right at the foot of what they call the Pyrenees. Right when he was going to go into by way of Italy. The Pyrenees is what separates southern France from Spain and Italy. So it got to the point where Hannibal, stopped to see whether or not they were going to try to outflank him now. Because another thing the Roman army would do, again, is that it would use a lot of Germanian slave people. Now, these people are the closest thing to Neanderthals that still exist at this time, and they were used by Rome a lot as basically grunts, like foot soldiers. They were called, at the time this place was called Almany, but eventually the translation became known as Germany or Germania. So the Germanian people were then used as like wild foot soldiers, just go in, so that way the Roman cavalry could just, maintain itself against Carthage. So this is what they did. They sent a lot of the wild men from the hills and stuff to come down and try to do away with it. So with that, Hannibal then had to go the opposite way. Now, again, with the elephants, the elephant was symbolic of Ganesh. Ganesh is the god that removes all obstacles in Hindu or ancient Indian cosmogony. So symbolically, Hannibal using the elephants as a means to go in to Italy or Rome and take it over was him basically using the ritualistic energy of the animal itself as a means to do away with the obstacle. And he did. And it worked. Because he was a planner. You know what I'm saying? He actually planned for years in advance. You know what I'm saying? This is why this tape again is called a blueprint for Moorish global conquest, because this is how he was able to then use the psychology of warfare as a means to ingrain in the ideology of the people that he was going to conquer, that he was better for them before they even saw him, because nobody in Rome saw Hannibal at this point. Not that many people even saw a Carthaginian at this point. So the whole hype as to what he was and what he was going to do or whatever was basically coming through the perspective of the people that were scared of him, which were mainly the people that were ruling Rome at the time. So we move further now into the Third Punic War. This is kind of when everything starts going to hell.
But did Hannibal take control of Europe? Of Rome?
He took it. Yeah, he took control. Now the European. Okay, this is where the rubber meet the road. This is where the European scholars, the Caucasian male scholars, the female scholars are going to say that this part is not true, because again they're going from the Roman account of this. So from the Roman account, he basically, they said that he went did all of that, got right to the foot of Rome, and then said, you know what, I'm gonna turn back and go all the way up. That's not true. What happened was he went to the gates of Rome basically and left them a note, a parchment, the same way I said that they do with Iraq. He left them the ransom note and said, I got your whole city on ransom, but while I'm here and doing this, what I'm going to do now is go further into Europe and then start setting up and taking over the little, what they call set traps around Rome, so that way Rome could not get any allies from any of the other nations that it tried to conquer. One of the main nation states that was against Rome was a nation state in a place they now call Afghanistan, that was called Bactria. And Bactria, there was another place where we would now call Turkey, that was called Bithynia, and they were like sister cities. So they would basically like run the interference if we needed more supplies, whatever, they would send it. So basically what Hannibal did was he went around and took over all of the stuff around Rome to basically isolate it again. Another thing that Hannibal did was that he built roads. And that's what Rome inherited. Another thing Rome inherited from him. When he knew that he was coming through, he sent his army in advance to build roads to make it easier for his people to come through. So that way they wouldn't have to go and traverse that crazy terrain, because they already would have a certain road, and then would build maps with those roads, and then would find ways to link those roads up. So that way all roads would eventually lead back to him, and then he could use that as the toll to then get people to pay him if they were trying to get into Rome. So basically he was setting up trade embargoes around Rome at the same time, the same way the United States did in the mid-90s when they set up the trade embargo around Iraq, the same way they did with Venezuela, the same way they did with Libya, the same way they did with Bosnia and Herzegovina, the same way they do with everything, because everything they're doing in war college they learn from him, Hannibal.
What was some of the weapons Hannibal used besides his army of animals?
The biggest weapon that he used, I would say, was his brain.
Okay, did he have a machete as well too?
The conventional weapons that he would use what's called the long spear.
Oh, okay.
He would use what's called the catapult. He would use what's called I forget the military name for it, but if you imagine like a giant catapult but with an arrow with an arrow bow at the front of it, he would then put giant spears on it. Well, not really a bayonet, but he would put giant spears on it and launch them. He would use a lot of like throwing weapons. He would use a lot of weapons that would be used as a means of traversing great distances at one time. He would also use a light cavalry as opposed to a heavy cavalry, because a heavy cavalry is there. How you doing, Queen? A heavy cavalry is there in order for let's say if somebody was trying to flank you. Flank is when you're coming from behind somebody and trying to basically bottleneck them between, let's say, themselves and the rest of their army. He would use a lighter cavalry to initially go in, because the light cavalry would then be used as a means to draw out the heavy armored cavalry of the enemy. And then once the heavy armored cavalry would come in against the light cavalry, his heavy cavalry would then come in and engulf them. Mm-hmm. So really, I would say the greatest weapon he would use would be his strategy and his tactics. Mm-hmm, the weapons he would use were basically just there to support his overall plan. But again, his downfall was the fact that he got too obsessed with the oath that he took against Rome, as opposed, and I think that eventually it kind of engulfed him. Like, you can't, when you're dealing with war, you almost have to be very dispassionate about who you're fighting. You can't get too emotionally involved to the point that you become obsessed with destroying your enemy. Because then what happens is your enemy, or the enemy, if the enemy is obsessed by nature, then what the enemy will then do is use your obsession, because you can't beat somebody that's already obsessed with you.
Right.
And obsession is a warped form of desire. So we as spiritual native people, we know that when we go to war with somebody, it's on. Because by the time you push a black person or a person like us to the degree of physical violence, that means that everything else has been exhausted. There's nothing else to talk about. So when we as African people go to war, we go to war all the way. You know what I'm saying? That's why it takes us so long to get provoked into it. You understand?
Mm-hmm. We don't
So
really want to do
the brother wound up getting caught up in one of the worst triangles in history. And that was a triangle between his niece, his political rival, and his enemy. We talked about earlier, there was another nation analogous to Carthage, that Carthage would sometime employ their soldiers as mercenaries to fight for Carthage. And that empire was known as the Numidian Empire. At the time, the Numidian Empire was ruled by a black man named Massinissa. And Massinissa was a great warrior, just as great, if not greater than Hannibal, because they all trained around the same thing, because they practiced the ancient custom that Moors practiced called ransoming. And that is, when I have potential beef with you, or you have potential beef with me, I send my daughter to live with you, or my son to live with you, and you send your son to live with me. And at the end of 18 years, they go back to each other. And then if they can't form a peace amongst each other, then we fight. So this is how Hannibal and Massinissa and Hasdrubal and Maga, they all grew up like that. Scipio Africanus, right, was the light-skinned black man from Rome that was then sent to replace, he was maybe the 5th replacement in generals for Rome against Hannibal. And they was not getting no way with him. So Scipio was then chosen as the latest replacement to basically fight the war, the Punic War against Hannibal. So what Scipio does is he actually studies Hannibal, which is what the other generals didn't do, because the other generals were under the assumption that he was a monster, so they were afraid of him. Scipio Africanus was a little different. Yeah, he was afraid of him, but he respected Hannibal when it came to his war ethic. So what he did was he studied his tactics and then realized that the best way to get at Hannibal would be to get an ally on Hannibal's turf. So what he did was he got on a boat and went across the Straits of Hercules in the Mediterranean Sea, or what modern day scholars call the Levant. That is the space between Europe and North Africa. That little thing is called the Straits of Hercules. He crosses that, and instead of going into Carthage, in which he would have probably been killed or arrested, he went into Numidia. Now, at the time that this is happening, Massinissa, who is the leader and king of Numidia, is betrothed to marry Sophonisba, who is Hannibal's niece, daughter of Hannibal's brother Hasdrubal, who was killed. Hannibal now was going to allow his niece to marry Massinissa to strengthen now the kingdom and allow them now, the Numidians and the Carthaginians, to go and kick Rome's ass. That didn't necessarily work out, because when Hannibal heard that Scipio was there talking to Massinissa, he figured that Massinissa was going to unite with Scipio and then call the wedding off. Then he took Sophonisba, his niece, and then married her off to one of his lieutenants. Massinissa took that as open disrespect and then decided to side with Rome against Hannibal. And then this is in what Shakespeare would call, this was the rub. This is when things started to deteriorate with Carthage, because then Carthage started going through a situation in which now it had to fight a war on two fronts. It had to fight the war against Rome or Italy in Europe. Then it had to fight a war against its neighbor on its own soil, per se. So now they had to fight a two-pronged battle when really they was only fighting one. And they already locked down. Remember, they had to still supply all of the set traps that they set up around Rome to keep it isolated. So now all of this is going down. The Roman Navy is becoming better, because now what they're doing, they following Scipio. They under Massinissa, because now Massinissa is advising Scipio. You know what I'm saying? To get back at Hannibal, because he really loved Sophonisba. You know what I mean? And she really loved him. But the problem...
Now, when Hannibal took over, how long was he able to stay in Rome before they defeated him? Did they ever get a chance to defeat him? Did they kill him?
No.
Okay.
Because what happened was the war wound up falling down between... Scipio gave Massinissa, because Massinissa still didn't really want to go at Hannibal like that. He really wanted Hannibal to realize that he was being a jerk for trying to renege on a marriage that was already betrothed before the whole conflict began. Because this was really to make peace. But Hannibal took it like, yo, you talking to my enemy. When really, all Massinissa was doing was doing what you supposed to do when you head in the empire and nation. You dealing in foreign diplomacy. You speaking, yeah, this dude is your enemy, and I'm not siding with him right now, but I gotta see what he's on, just in case, because if he beats you, he may try to flip on me. So I either gotta find out how you really get down, Hannibal, and I gotta find out how you get down, Scipio, so that way I make the best decision for my people. Because even though we all are black in a different way. You know what I'm saying?
Okay,
we all got our own way.
So when Hannibal went up into Rome, he was fighting lighter skin.
Yeah.
Not the it. He was fighting the
lighter skin.
Because the it wasn't there yet, you said.
Nah,
it wasn't even there at that time.
Nah, the it that was there was the savage.
It is the Caucasian, the European.
Yeah. The it that was there was the savage Germanian Neanderthal type people that was being rounded up and used as foot soldiers, as wild animals almost.
Like canified.
Right, canified.
Put them in the front.
Right.
I got you.
Same way when you watch the movie Gladiator, you had them in the beginning of Gladiator where they was fighting on wild Germans and was cutting people's heads off and stuff. So these wild Germanian people were the ones that the Roman people were using as canified to keep their light-skinned black soldiers, you know, more away from the real fighting until it got up close and personal.
Right.
So once that all went down, Hannibal winds up realizing now he's got to go to war with Massinissa. So now him and Massinissa basically start going at it. And then Scipio basically gives Massinissa the ultimate ultimatum. He said, well, look, man, if you beat this dude for us, we'll allow you to join us in our triumvirate, and you can join our republic as the only person that is not a Roman to join this republic. And we will give you the palliament, which is the royal robe that we inherited from Hannibal's people. You know what I mean? Remember I said the purple Morex shit that they would wear.
Now, at this time, where are the Moors? Because the Moors was in Spain too.
Yeah. The people that we talking about are the Moors. The Carthaginians, the Phoenicians, the Romans, they are Moorish people because they black. You see what I'm saying? Or they were black at this time. So to say that there was, let's say, a group of people that were called Moors in Rome, yes, that's true. There were people that were called them that. But those were usually people that were seen as like the priests and like the foreigners that would come from, like, just like you got black people that are American today. You know what I'm saying? You had black people or Moorish people that were Roman in that day. Because it's the same system that we're under. So these black people, i.e. Moorish people, were lighter, browner, darker, but what separated them was the nation state or the empire that they were affiliated to. So did they call themselves Moors? The Romans did. They called black people that lived with them, you know, if you were darker per se, they may call you a Moor. You know what I'm saying? But when they asked you what nation you represented, they would say Rome. You see what I'm saying? Same way you ask a black man today, okay, you American, you know what I'm saying? You're a black man, but you're also a citizen of the United States. You know what I'm saying? But the Europeans put out there that the United States was set up by white folk. You see what I'm saying? So in that, you have to equate what is happening in ancient times to you today because you're under basically the same jurisdiction. We are Hannibal Barca right now. We are collectively the remnants of Carthage. You know what I mean? We not them people in Morocco and North Africa today, but they know that we are. But the thing is, when the diaspora, when Carthage eventually fell, right? It fell to the Numidians. It didn't fall to Rome. So based on that, now Carthage then had to start getting broke up because when the war came and Hannibal wound up having to go at it with, they never really invaded Carthage. Carthage was never really invaded like that, like broken up the way Rome eventually was. What happened was it was basically stunted, and they were allowed to have a certain degree of autonomy. You know what I'm saying? Because they were the ones with the most money. So if Rome went in and broke Carthage, that means that Rome would lose out on all of the money and it would make no sense. So what they had to do was allow Carthage to maintain a certain degree of autonomy in order for Rome to find out enough about Carthage and how the inner workings went for them to copy it and then break Carthage up how they wanted. And that's what they did. But this happened with Massinissa, the Numidian, who invaded and met Hannibal on the battlefield. They fought. Massinissa eventually won, and then in that, Hannibal had to go in exile. So him and his family or whatever, they went into what's now called Bithynia, and then there was a big bounty on Hannibal's head, but they never caught him. You know what I'm saying?
They put the bounty on him?
Oh, they put the bounty on him hard. You know, but the Numidian, Massinissa, show and prove again how we as people still look out for each other. He never allowed his people to go out there and get Hannibal, because in the end he respected him. He was just heated of the fact that you married my queen, the woman I was going to marry, off to your nephew or whatever, based on what you thought was happening, not based on what was really happening. And then eventually Sophasiba, to really add the drama to it, she wanted to commit suicide, wanted to kill herself because she loved this dude so much. So all of that was dealing on Hannibal too. You know what I'm saying? So he goes to Bithynia in exile, and then he's just out there. So while this is going on, Carthage is being broken down, is being absorbed into the greater Roman Republic, and then Rome starts using Carthage as its Rome in Africa. Because at the time that this exists, Africa to Rome at this time is only North Africa. It's not the whole interior. The whole interior and everything else in Africa has nothing to do with Africa itself as how the Romans did it. But again, the problem is that we get this history through people that have a vested interest in keeping us out of it. Because if we study the tactics of Hannibal Barca, and we study the tactics and the rumor as to how it went down, because if you look at the story between Hannibal, Massinissa, Scipio, and Sophasiba, that's almost like the story of Tupac, Biggie, Faith Evans, and what you call it, and Suge Knight. It's the same story, because we're the same people. We're the same people. We are ancestors returning, And because again we are out of tune with our history, we are still looking at it the same way. You could look at that also in the story of to not just make it
Princess Diana
and Dodi Fayette and the royal family and Dodi Fayette's pops.
Yeah.
It's the same story.
So that right there ties into what I asked you earlier, is why is it so important to know your history?
Yes.
What is this going to do for me? Because it shows you that history has a way of repeating itself over and over again.
Because history is the ultimate ritual. History is the ritual that is constant. Because it is something that is constantly there. It is the past. You know what I'm saying? It is the future. It is the past. It is all of that, because it is a constant form of energy that is constantly being used. And if you can then take the energy of what history is and put your face in it, then what you do is you create a fake juncture point for you to upload your false history into the grand myth of what it is. Because again, Carthage, if it wasn't for Carthage, there'd be no Catholic Church. Because it was the archbishops of Carthage that allowed the Catholic Church the charter to function under the council of the Nicene Council in 333 AD under Constantine the Great. Because up until that point, Caucasian people, as Germanian people, Neanderthalic people that were not there at the time, were seen as subhuman. So some type of civilization process or religion had to be created for them to bring them back into the human family. So to bring them back into the human family, this artifice had to be created for them to exist within. And so that artifice became known as the Catholic Church. Because up until that point, I'll show you, now we get into some of the pictures. Up until that point, they were worshiping images like this. This is Saint Maurian. Right? This is Saint Maurian. He was a Roman soldier during the time, during the reign of Hadrian.
Okay.
Sir Maurian, the Black Knight. Whenever you hear the Black Knight, they talk about him. Saint Maurian. Now you see that's a black man.
Yes, sir.
You see that's a Moor. You see his name is Maurian.
Where that's at? Down here?
Yeah.
Sir Maurian.
Right.
Saint Maurice.
Right.
Yeah, he's also known as Saint Maurice. Maurice comes from Morisco. Anytime you see this word right here, M-A-U-R,
that's more.
That's more. Same way, but each more represents a different aspect. So M-A-U-R would be those Moors that are more Latin per se. M-A-O-O-R would be those Moors, let's say, from Europe. M-U-U-R would be those Moors from over here in America. M-O-H-R would be those Moors from Greenland and Germany and all those places. There's another type of way. This M-O-O-R-E is those Moors from, let's say, Wales and England and Scotland.
What about M-U-U-R?
M-U-U-R are those Moors from this side of the world.
Yes.
Okay.
So each one has its own geographic designation as well.
Right.
But Saint Maurian was a Moor who came across, this is way back, this is like right after the Punic War. We go through, and Carthage, right, is going through it. They've already been annexed. So what happens now is the Moors in Rome now become the mercenary army. The Carthaginians become the mercenary army for Rome now. So now they got to fight for Rome. So now they start fighting for Rome, and they go up into the hills or whatever. And they come across these wild Germanian people. But these wild Germanian people are worshiping a Coptic version of Christ. They worshiping the Black Madonna. And he finds them doing this. So his Roman soldier says, well, you need to kill these people because that was the order from the Senate. We got to do away with these people. Saint Maurian, the Moor, said, well, no, I can't kill these people because they worshiping the Coptic Madonna, and I'm from Abyssinia, which is also Ethiopia. So what happens is the Roman says, you're not going to do it. He asked him 3 times. He said, okay, well, now I'm going to have to decimate you. Decimation in war means that every 10th man in the regiment gets killed, starting with Morian. So he was then killed, and then he became the patron saint of the Catholic Church. Right? So when the Catholic Church was being brought into existence, based on a system called the cathode system, because the Catholic is a system, come from what's called a cathode system. You have a cathode system and an anode system. The cathode system is about the body and materialism, and that's it. An anode system is the opposite of that. So based on that definition, you can see what the Catholic Church is about in its present incarnation. So what they did was they had to get permission from the people who basically created the Coptic Christianity to begin with, and those people were the Abyssinian people, and those Abyssinian people had a new base in Carthage, and in order for them to set up the Catholic Church, they had to get a charter from the archbishops of Carthage. You can find this in any book that you get on Constantine, that's written from the perspective of the council, not perspective of what it is they did, but who was in the council to do this. Because remember, at this time, Rome is a pagan nation. Okay? And again, this council allegedly comes maybe 250 years after the birth of Christ, and maybe 2,000 years, and maybe about 1,500 years from the time of Hannibal. Okay? So historically, they have to position themselves in this thing. That's why, again, in looking at Hannibal's life as a blueprint for global domination or global conquest, what you have to always understand is that when you're dealing with war, in the human perspective of war, you are dealing with a minute aspect of what war really is about. You know what I'm saying? War is really about the reunification of opposites. War is really about understanding your position enough. How are you, man? Understanding your position enough as a participant in the battle, enough to win the war. You know what I'm saying? Certain times, I don't know about other people, but there have been times where you were put in position to have to fight, and if you don't really want to fight for whatever reason, you'll lose. But if you enter every fight like you would rather die than lose, you will win. You will win. Because again, what they say, it's not about the strength of the dog. It's about
the bark. It's not about the size of the dog. It's about the bark of the dog.
Oh, the dog. You know what I mean? Or vice versa. It's all about what you put into it.
Going into it. So
a lot of these tactics, again, will follow. Case in point. This depiction, this is a grimoire. That's the name of the actual book this is what I created about stuff that I've been doing in knowledge to over the years. This is just one of them, but...
Which picture you showing?
This picture I'm going to show you here first. This picture was done by a European, what they call a European...
that looks great.
What do you call it? Impressionist painter. Or a landscape painter. His name is Thomas Cole. He was a 33rd degree Mason. He studied the ancient pastoral scenes of ancient America. But he did a series called The Course of Empire.
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah, you peep him, right? See the little wild man in the bush. Right? This series was a series of 4 paintings. Now these paintings are about the size of this room, if not bigger. Right?
Right.
These 4 pictures were representative of how empires come into being and how they destroy themselves. So ultimately, this first picture is called the Arcadian period. In the Arcadian period, in any nation or empire,
which one you want to see now?
This one right here.
Oh, you still on that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is called an Arcadian period. Arcadian is another mean for pastoral. It's mad bushes, as you can see, the wild Caucasian man in the bushes coming out. He's wild. There's nothing been solidified here yet. There's no empires really being built on this side of the world. Now this is just an allegorical expression of how empires come into existence. Now, whenever you're dealing with anything that is pastoral, you're dealing with an agrarian type of culture. You're dealing with a culture that's dealing strictly from that of the earth and natural things, nothing artificial. You could go down.
Okay.
Now, the next level in his picture is basically the pastoral, more what they call Arcadian aspect of it. But if you can see, I don't know if you can see it at the top. You bring it up a little bit. Yeah, there you go.
Hold on.
Yeah, right here. Right there is great. As you can see, you got an image of Stonehenge there. Right? That monolith, or these monolithic things, had their beginnings or their images and versions of this in Europe that were built again by Carthaginians or Phoenicians or people, and they also, the Carthaginian and Phoenician people also influenced and gave culture to the people we also call the Celts and the Druids. So the same way this is a representation of Stonehenge, right, is the same way you see that.
Right.
Okay? Now, as we look though, there's, can you zoom out a little bit? Okay. Now we can go over here. That was the next phase of the empire. This right here is called the consummation of empire. This is what happens when an empire or a nation, what's up, homie? Or an empire or a nation finally celebrates its own independence and autonomy. Now you see how grand it is, right?
Right.
Right here you see a dude on an elephant.
Where
Right?
that's at? Where that's at?
Right here in the middle. Keep going.
Point to it on your book.
This guy in
So I'm
the,
gonna follow your finger.
right here.
Okay.
Go in, yeah. He's on the elephant. Right? Because then they got all of this again. This is them. This would basically be how Rome would have looked when, except for the white folk, how Rome would have looked
Right.
once they absorbed Carthage into their empire. Okay?
Right. You know they always got to put their face on something.
Right, right. But as you pull back, you see the boats. Remember I was telling you about the Phoenicians and all of that.
Right.
You see the gold coming down, the gold gilded statues.
Yeah, that's all Moorish science. There.
All of that is Moorish science.
You know,
And all of those are
they
Moors
nothing.
involved in that.
What about that great statue up there?
Yeah, you see her, right? That's Fortuna. That's an image, again, Fortuna, that I told you that Hannibal took the oath in front of. Okay? So again, what Rome does is after it kills you or takes you over, it makes a religion out of your heroes, and it makes money off of that through your veneration of them. Because now they absorbed everything into you. Okay?
Right.
So true.
Now we go from that, of course, this is the consummation of empire. Now we go to the last phase, which is the destruction of empire. This is what happens, or what happened to Rome towards the end. As you can see, is being destroyed by its own people. You see this woman right here. She's trying to get away from this dude. She'd rather die, jump off, the same way black women and black women used to jump off the boats and stuff, or
That's
jump
right.
out the window when they knew the slave catcher was coming for them. You understand? You see the bridges. You see everything being destroyed. Now remember, these paintings, when you look at them in real life, they're like the size of this room, literally. Okay? So this man went in and really studied enough. Again, a 33-degree Mason, Thomas Cole. He was very famous in the art world. But again, I show this picture to show you eventually what is going to happen to places like the United States, to places like England, to places like Rome, to places like the Vatican. Because you cannot create an empire based on hostile takeover, whether we initially founded it or not. The fact that we as black people founded Rome and Greece has nothing to do with what eventually these things became. And you see they roll here. Where is it at? Right here. Can you zoom in on that?
That's the what?
That's basically the showing you the time when the empire fell. See what I'm saying? You can't really see it, but that was the artist's rendition of showing himself within the piece. Because
Hold on,
remember,
this dude look black.
yeah, the Moor with the fez on. I mean with the turban. Yeah, with the beard and all that. Yeah, all of that. And what is he doing? He is burning up. The same way Hollywood is burning right now. Burn Hollywood, burn in LA.
Right.
The same way the fires are where there's smoke, there's fire.
Right.
And whenever you create a situation or an empire based on hostile takeover, your empire will run its course and be taken over. So this is the four-pronged evolution of how empires wind up being destroyed through a European Freemasons perception of it. So again, they already know that their end is already in because their end has been written in their beginning. Another image of what I'm talking about to show and prove. These were some of the slave pits that we had in Carthage, as well as what later became Rome, as well as later became ancient Moorish Spain. We would have slave pits where we went to sell European women, European men, Caucasoid by another name. Here's an image. Here you got Moors selling Caucasian women in the market. And what is he doing? He's checking her teeth. What did Willie Lynch and them do?
Yeah.
Back in the day, they used to try to check our teeth, right?
That's right.
That's a black man.
So they got all that science from us.
Yeah.
And they had to make them a little lighter because God forbid they be our complexion.
Yeah, but I got darker ones in here. And again, these were done by Caucasian men during the 1800s when they would go into Moorish republics. Here go another one. This is called the New Arrival. That's the name of this painting. I'm sorry, this one.
That's another one.
That's another one. Well, peep this.
This is ill.
Here you go. Inspecting new arrivals.
New arrivals.
Who's being sold? The Caucasian woman, and then here go the European Freemason slave that is entreating the Moor, talking to the Moor about the slaves that this Moor is bringing him.
Now, what is this right here?
This is a harem. This is a harem scene where Moors are selling white women, and this was painted in the 1800s, late 1800s. So we talking about like 1899. You know what I'm saying?
It's a really good movie. Sidney Poitier.
Yeah.
With the bell. Which movie?
Yeah, there's a movie called The Long Ships with Sidney Poitier, and it shows Moors enslaving white people in mass, in which Sidney Poitier is playing a Moor married to a Caucasian woman. So again, Hannibal as an original man is important to us as original people because he represents that which we have always been. He represents we as original men standing up and taking responsibility for the things we want to make happen in this world. When you look at the movie The Departed, Jack Nicholson said my only problem with the dark chappies is that they still waiting for somebody to give them something when really if they want anything in this world they gotta take it. And in that movie, Jack Nicholson played a member of the Knights of Columbus, which is a Vatican order. You know what I'm saying? So again, that's the Vatican telling you that. That's not just him. Oh, I'm sorry, this is the last stage of empire. Desolation. From that series of pictures we saw, this is basically the last in that series. This is what happens
so that's what happened. That's how it looks now.
Yeah, this is the desolation of
now
empire.
when you look in the back at the pillars,
yep,
you can see the Temple of Luxor
right there. You see it right there.
So you
and then
know
in the back,
it had to be us. They had to be us.
Yes.
We came out there. We had to build all that up.
Yes,
and
these
having
people can't
been
create
there,
that.
having physically been in Rome, it was the one country that I did not enjoy in Europe. And I was 20 at the time. That was exactly 10 years ago. And I went everywhere in Europe, but for some reason, when I was in Rome, it was a dead vibration. Everything is very stolen. But the people that are there do know who the original woman is. If you know.
Right.
It's really if you know. Like,
right.
To go and be like, oh no, I'm not a 14th Amendment citizen. Like it totally changes the vibration of how they treat you. But you can see in the architecture and the way the buildings are shaped, in the fountain center, just everything, how it's built. It definitely seemed like our city, our place at one point. and something happened. This is just intuition when I was there and didn't really know what was going on. And then to actually leave the place and to see the difference in how other countries are run in Europe. Rome is a very interesting spot. I really didn't. It was beautiful, but I didn't enjoy it. You can tell that there was a lot of death, a lot of death, a lot of just morose energy. It just seemed very.
Where are you from? What's the background of your father?
I'm from Cordoba. My father's name is Maximo Cordoba, and our family is from Spain. It's from Cordoba. Oh, okay. My mother and father were both born in Panama, and my great-grandparents were both from Spain as well as the Barbados side. So just based on like my grandmother's the Barbados Bajan side, and then my grandfather and my father's side are all from Cordoba.
So we all over the world, huh?
Her doing the knowledge to her to build with the queen, man. When I first met her, really did the lineage to her family. One of her direct descendants is a Moor named Al-Hakam Cordoba the first, and he was the one who laid out one of the first libraries in Spain, in what now is today called Andalusia, as well as the cornerstone for the city that would then become Cordoba. So everyone, the custom in our lineage was that anybody that was named for the place is not named after it. The place is named for them.
Right, who they come.
So she is a direct Moorish princess from that lineage that we've already proved and sent the paperwork to these people, and they've accepted it. So that means that they know that it's true. So it can't just be her. Right. It can't just be me. It can't just be you. It got to be all of us that they know. I'm looking here in one of my notes. It says one of the Latin terms that when they would talk about Hannibal, they would say Hannibal ad portas, and that basically means Hannibal is at the gates, because they were so. I'll read it to you. This is Latin.
You can show it at the same time. It's so powerful to see what it is you're reading.
Yeah.
What's that?
Right here.
This is a Latin saying that the Romans have often used, which simply means Hannibal is at the door. This is a perfect example of what effect Hannibal had on people in Roman society. Rome had not had a military threat on their treasured city since the Gauls had sacked Rome, and they perceived Hannibal as a definite threat. As well, they should have. It has been said that Hannibal took an oath from his father when he was 9 that he would hate Rome for life. Also, Carthage's queen Dido was quoted as saying, "Neither love nor treaty shall there be between the nations. Let your shores oppose their shores, your waves their waves, your arms their arms. This is my prayer. Let them fight, they and their sons forever."
That's a black woman saying that. That's the queen of Carthage, one of the queens of Carthage rocking that at that time. This was Carthage's attitude towards Rome. Obviously, it was all adopted by Hannibal. Another part of the mystique of Hannibal was his use of elephants. Rome had never ever seen elephants before. Then they received the shock of their most hated and feared rival marching on Rome with elephants. The fear of Hannibal alone in their midst
became so large
that it was said that Roman parents would use it as a means to threaten their children for misbehaving. Stop misbehaving because Hannibal will come and get you. Same way in Usual Suspects, he said, yo, they use Kaiser Sose like that. Like, don't rat in your own pops. Or Kaiser Sose will come and get you, because we take on mythic proportions in people's minds, yo. We as original men and women take mythical proportions, epic proportions in the mind of people that aren't us. People look at us every day astounded as to the things that we do and what we're able to achieve, because we are the ones who again descend from people like this. And what we have to do is we have to start really getting into things that really need to be getting into, like the tactics of the brother. Read the War College's treatise on Hannibal. Go to the military websites and research Hannibal. Go out and find out what your ancestor did, because he is a blueprint. The things that he did is literally a blueprint laid open for us, because everybody today that's doing war is following him. except us. Everybody want to talk about Machiavellian. What Machiavelli did, Niccolo Machiavelli. Yeah, he was smart about deception and things like that. But Machiavelli was not getting on no elephant. And not only that, Machiavelli was from a different time. If there was no Hannibal to have and write down and do the tactics and be who he is, there would be no Machiavelli. There would be no George Bush. There would be no army. There would be no navy. So again, what we got to do again is give respect to the brother. Hannibal Barca is his whole name. He had a brother named Hasdrubal Barca. He had a father named Hamilcar Barca. He had a little brother named Mago Barca. And
it would be a great movie.
And again, they was gonna do a movie on him, and but guess who they was gonna get to play him? They was gonna get Vin Diesel,
which wasn't that bad.
It's not bad. But if I was doing it, Vin Diesel would have been Scipio Africanus. You know what I'm saying? Morgan Freeman.
I would have had Vin Rames. Vin
Rames would have been
excellent.
Perfect.
He'd have been perfect. But Vin Rames is,
perfect. But this is what I mean. This is what I mean. Like, they'll make him black, but they won't make him too black.
Okay.
And Vin Diesel would be great.
What could we look forward to, brother? What do you think should be our next discussion? Because we're not closing out. We never close.
That's right.
We're going to continue. This is like a continue on thing here.
That's right.
So what do you think we need to really touch on to wake the minds of our people up? That's really have not really been touched on yet.
The next one I would like to do it with the brother Sonetta and House of Consciousness probably is a tape on Dr. Pascal Beverly Randolph.
Yes.
And who is that?
Dr. Pascal Beverly Randolph was the Moor, i.e. black man, who was a spiritual advisor for Abraham Lincoln, as well as the grand occultist and grand master of the Rosicrucian order, of all the Rosicrucians all over the world. Of anybody that's doing occult science today,
Blavatsky, all that.
Anybody, Crowley, Blavatsky, anybody that's talking about metaphysics, occult science, or ancient Freemasonic type of knowledge, witchcraft, sexual magic,
where you're tying anything up from the celestial.
All of that comes from Dr. Pascal Beverly Randolph,
and nobody gives him.
No dap. They made if the viewers get my tape on Sigilmancy, Superhero Part 2, I talk about that he is also the blueprint for the character in Marvel that they have called Doctor Strange. They just put a movie out about him. They even gave the character in the comic book Pascal Beverly Randolph's exact address and building in Greenwich Village, because he is the one who popped it all off.
Okay, you know what I would like to do with you is one day we can take a little stroll around the neighborhood, Brooklyn. Go to Brooklyn, and we can add on to what you have done before. That was great work. I saw that. We can go up in the museum, and there's another one that True Master took me to. Have you ever saw that tape?
The Morris joint. That was hot.
Yeah, that one right there, we can go up there too.
That's the home.
Yeah, we can go up there and we can connect it all together.
That was awesome.
So I think that'll be real good if we can do that one day. We can set up a date where we can go out there and then come on in here and do it.
We'll do it. Anything to bring the people through. I would say peace. Again, this is Aseer, the Duke of Tears. This is Selena Nigel Cordoba L.
Always gets me.
Empress of 10,000 years. Always.
Thank you.
It's House of Consciousness.
And we say we're not closing out.
We're not closing out.
We're just taking a break. That's all. We're closing in. We're just taking a break, and we'll see you soon. Stay with us. House of Consciousness. HOC. Peace.
Like the video. Thumb up the video.